Mother Bear got stuck in the middle of two trees. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The early morning sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Small woodland creatures scurried about, gathering food and tending to their morning routines. In a small clearing near the edge of the vast wilderness, a modest wooden cabin stood peacefully. This was the home of the Harper family, Olivia, Nathaniel, and their 13-month-old baby boy, Theo. Theo Harper was an unusually perceptive child, with bright blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with wonder and curiosity. His chubby fingers often pointed at birds flying overhead or squirrels darting across their yard, his excited babbles filling the cabin with joy. Olivia and Nathaniel had chosen this remote location precisely for its proximity to nature, hoping to raise their son with an appreciation for the wilderness. What the Harper family didn't know was that they shared the forest with a mother bear named Luna by local wildlife researchers. Luna was a magnificent American black bear with a glossy coat that shimmered in the sunlight. She had recently emerged from hibernation with her 6-month-old cub, whom the researchers had affectionately named Nova. The pair roamed the forest together, Luna teaching her young one the ways of survival, which berries were safe to eat, where to find the juiciest insects, and how to avoid the occasional human hikers who ventured into their territory. That particular morning, Olivia had taken advantage of Theo's unusually long nap to hang laundry outside. The gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, creating a perfect spring day. She hummed softly as she worked, unaware that her husband Nathaniel had driven into town for supplies, leaving her and sleeping Theo as the only occupants of the cabin. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, Luna and Nova were foraging for food. The plentiful spring had provided an abundance of fresh berries, and Luna was teaching Nova how to distinguish between the sweet, edible ones and those that could cause stomach distress. The mother bear's keen nose suddenly caught a different scent, one that made her mouth water instantly. Honey. Somewhere nearby there had to be a beehive. Luna followed the enticing aroma, with Nova bounding excitedly behind her. The mother bear's focus was so intense that she didn't notice the unusual narrowing of the path ahead. Between two massive pine trees, barely 5 feet apart at their base, the scent of honey grew strongest. Without hesitation, Luna squeezed her large body between the trees, her determination to reach the sweet treat overriding her usual caution. It was a terrible mistake. As Luna pushed forward, her broad shoulders became wedged between the unyielding trunks. At first, she wasn't concerned. A bit of wiggling had always freed her from tight spots before. But as she struggled, bark digging into her fur, she realized with growing panic that she was truly stuck. The more she pushed, the tighter she became wedged. Her paws couldn't find purchase on the smooth ground, and her powerful muscles couldn't generate enough force to push the trees apart. Nova watched in confusion as her mother's struggles grew more desperate. The little cub circled around, making distressed whimpering sounds, occasionally standing on her hind legs to paw ineffectually at Luna's trapped form. Luna's initial grunts of frustration turned into roars of pain and fear that echoed through the forest. Back at the Harper cabin, Olivia had just finished hanging the last piece of laundry when she heard the distant roars. A chill ran down her spine. In the 3 years they'd lived here, she'd heard bear calls before, but never one so filled with distress. She hurried inside to check on Theo, relieved to find him still sleeping peacefully in his crib. Olivia tried calling Nathaniel, but cell service was spotty as usual. The roars continued, occasionally interspersed with what sounded like a smaller, higher-pitched cry. Nature lover though she was, Olivia knew better than to investigate a distressed bear call. She decided to stay inside with Theo until Nathaniel returned. But as she peeked through the window toward the sound, she spotted movement at the forest edge, a small black shape tumbling through the underbrush. Squinting against the sunlight, Olivia gasped as she realized it was a bear cub, alone and seemingly disoriented. Inside the cabin, Theo began to stir. His soft cries quickly turned to happy babbles as he pulled himself to standing in his crib, bouncing eagerly as his mother entered the nursery. Olivia picked him up, her mind racing with concern about the cub. Where there was a cub, a mother was never far behind. But the distressed roars suggested something was very wrong. "We need to stay inside today, little one," Olivia whispered, kissing Theo's forehead as she carried him to the living room. She placed him in his playpen with his favorite toys, hoping to keep him occupied while she kept watch through the window. But Theo was in an adventurous mood that morning. The moment Olivia turned to look outside again, he managed to push open the loose latch of his playpen, something he'd never done before. With the determined focus only toddlers possess, Theo crawled across the wooden floor toward the partially open back door that Olivia had forgotten to close completely in her hurry. The persistent cries of the bear cub seemed to call to him, stirring something primal and compassionate in his innocent heart. Before Olivia realized what was happening, Theo had pushed through the door's gap and was crawling determinedly across the back porch. Olivia turned just in time to see her baby disappearing through the door. "Theo!" she cried out, her heart leaping into her throat. She rushed after him, but as she reached the porch, she froze in horror. The bear cub had wandered into their yard, and Theo was crawling straight toward it. Time seemed to slow as Olivia watched her baby boy moving toward the wild animal. The bear cub, Nova, appeared equally curious about the small human approaching. Nova tilted her head, her round ears twitching as she studied the strange creature that moved on all fours like her, yet smelled so different. In the distance, Luna's desperate roars continued, each one more pained than the last. Olivia's maternal instincts screamed at her to rush forward and snatch her baby away. But the wildlife ranger's warnings echoed in her mind. Never run toward a bear, even a cub. The mother could perceive it as a threat. She was trapped in an impossible situation. Moving slowly, she began inching toward Theo, her voice trembling as she called to him softly, trying not to startle either her son or the wild animal. "Theo, baby, come to Mommy," she coaxed, her voice barely above a whisper. But Theo, with the single-minded determination of a toddler, continued his journey toward the fascinating furry creature. Just as Olivia was about to risk rushing forward, the distant sound of tires on gravel announced Nathaniel's return. The rumble of the engine startled Nova, who backed away slightly but didn't flee. Instead, the cub let out a plaintive cry that seemed to call for help, a cry that made Theo babble excitedly in response. Nathaniel jumped out of his truck, groceries forgotten as he took in the scene before him. "Olivia," he called, his voice tight with fear, "don't move." "It's the cub," Olivia called back, her eyes never leaving Theo. "The mother must be the one we hear roaring. Something's wrong." Nathaniel, a former forest ranger before turning to carpentry, assessed the situation quickly. "The mother sounds trapped," he said, moving slowly toward his family. "That's why the cub is alone. They never leave their mothers willingly at this age." As if confirming his theory, another agonized roar echoed through the trees, causing Nova to whimper and look back toward the forest with obvious distress. The cub paced anxiously, torn between fear of the humans and the desperate need to return to her mother. By now, Theo had stopped crawling and was sitting upright, his chubby legs splayed before him as he watched the cub with fascination. He let out a delighted giggle and extended his hand, palm up, in a gesture that seemed almost like an offering of friendship. What happened next stunned both Olivia and Nathaniel. Nova cautiously approached Theo, sniffing the air and making soft huffing sounds. The distance between wild animal and human child closed to mere feet, then inches. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as the bear cub gently touched her wet nose to Theo's outstretched fingers. "Don't move," Nathaniel whispered, slowly retrieving his phone to capture this extraordinary moment. "I've never seen anything like this." Theo laughed joyfully at the contact, completely unafraid. Something in his innocent reaction seemed to resonate with the cub. Nova withdrew slightly, then did something unexpected. She tugged gently at Theo's sleeve with her teeth, not to harm, but as if trying to lead him somewhere. "She wants help," Nathaniel said, his ranger instincts kicking in. "The cub is trying to lead him to her mother." "Absolutely not," Olivia hissed, finally breaking free of her paralysis and moving forward to retrieve Theo. But as she approached, Nova backed away, whimpering louder, and Theo began to cry as if sensing the sudden tension. The impasse was broken by another sound, human voices. From the hiking trail that skirted their property emerged 3 figures, an older man with a white beard wearing a park ranger uniform, and 2 younger people carrying scientific equipment. "Hello there," the older man called, then stopped abruptly when he spotted the bear cub. "Everyone stay calm," he said, his voice dropping to a quiet, authoritative tone. "That's Nova, one of our monitored cubs. Is that Luna we hear in distress?" "You know these bears?" Nathaniel asked, positioning himself between the newcomers and his family. The older man nodded, cautiously approaching. "I'm Dr. Marcus Reynolds, head of the Black Bear Research Project. These are my assistants, Elena Vasquez and Jen Park. We've been tracking Luna and Nova since Nova's birth. Those distress calls are definitely Luna's." Elena, a woman in her early 30s with sun-weathered skin and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, studied the situation with concerned eyes. "Nova wouldn't leave Luna willingly. Something serious must have happened." Jin, a tall young man with glasses and a clipboard, was already taking notes. "The distress calls suggest physical trauma or entrapment. We need to investigate immediately." Dr. Reynolds nodded in agreement. "We have tranquilizers if necessary, but I'd prefer not to use them with a cub present. It could cause additional distress." All this time, Nova continued her anxious pacing, occasionally looking back toward the forest and then at the humans, as if pleading for help. Theo, now secured in Olivia's arms, reached out toward the cub, babbling insistently. "Your son seems to have formed an unusual bond with Nova," Dr. Reynolds observed, his scientific curiosity evident. "In 30 years of studying bears, I've never seen such behavior from a wild cub." Nathaniel explained what they had witnessed between Theo and Nova. Dr. Reynolds listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "This is extraordinary. There have been documented cases of interspecies empathy, but rarely between bears and humans, and certainly not with such a young child." Elena approached Olivia carefully. "Your son might actually help us in an unusual way. Nova seems to trust him, and that trust might extend to us if we're with him." "You can't seriously be suggesting we use our baby to help with a distressed bear," Olivia said incredulously, holding Theo tighter. "Not exactly," Elena clarified. "But we could follow Nova back to Luna with you and your son at a safe distance. Your presence might keep Nova calm enough for us to help Luna without needing tranquilizers." As they debated the best course of action, a new sound cut through the air, a crack of thunder. Dark clouds had been gathering unnoticed during the tense encounter, and now fat raindrops began to fall. The sudden downpour sent Nova scurrying for shelter under the porch of the Harpers' cabin. "We need to act quickly, Doctor," Reynolds said urgently. "If Luna is trapped and this turns into a serious storm, she could be in grave danger from exposure or flooding, depending on her location." The unexpected development forced a quick decision. After a brief discussion, a compromise was reached. The research team would follow Nova's trail back to Luna, while the Harper family remained safely in their cabin. Jin would stay with them as a precaution, maintaining radio contact with Dr. Reynolds and Elena. As the researchers prepared to leave, collecting emergency equipment from their vehicle, another unexpected twist occurred. Nova refused to leave the porch, even when Elena attempted to lure her with food. The cub seemed fixated on the cabin, or more specifically on Theo, who was watching the scene through the window, his small hands pressed against the glass. "I've never seen behavior like this," Dr. Reynolds admitted, wiping rain from his beard. "It's almost as if she's refusing to leave without the child." Inside, Theo began crying inconsolably, straining toward the window as if desperate to get back outside. His wails seemed to distress Nova even further, and the cub responded with plaintive cries of her own. "This is ridiculous," Nathaniel said, running a hand through his damp hair. "We can't risk our son's safety because of some unexplainable connection between him and a wild animal." But as the storm intensified and Luna's roars became increasingly faint and desperate, Olivia made a suggestion that surprised everyone, including herself. "What if we all go together? We'll keep Theo safe in his carrier on Nathaniel's back, well away from any danger, but close enough that Nova can see him. Would that work?" Dr. Reynolds considered the idea thoughtfully. "It's unorthodox, but it might be our best option given the circumstances. The storm is worsening, and Luna's time could be running out." And so, a most unusual rescue party set out into the stormy forest. Dr. Reynolds and Elena leading the way, followed by Nathaniel with Theo secured in a hiking carrier on his back, and Olivia close behind. Jin brought up the rear, carrying medical supplies and keeping in radio contact with the ranger station. Nova darted ahead of them, then back, as if making sure they were following, her behavior more like a domestic dog guiding its owners than a wild bear cub. The rain fell in heavy sheets now, making the forest floor slick and treacherous. Visibility was poor, but Nova seemed to know exactly where she was going, pausing occasionally to look back at Theo, who had calmed remarkably once they began moving toward Luna. After 20 minutes of difficult hiking, they heard Luna's roars more clearly, though they had weakened considerably, a concerning sign. Nova surged ahead with renewed purpose, and the humans followed as quickly as safety would allow. When they finally reached Luna, the sight was both heartbreaking and alarming. The massive mother bear was indeed wedged tightly between two ancient pine trees, her fur soaked and matted, her eyes wild with pain and fear. The ground around her had been torn up by her desperate struggles, and it was clear she had been trapped for hours. Most concerning was the rising water around her paws. A small stream nearby had swollen with the rainfall and was beginning to flood the depression where Luna was trapped. "She'll drown if the water keeps rising," Elena said grimly, assessing the situation. "And we can't safely tranquilize her in water." Luna's reaction to their arrival was immediate and fierce. Despite her weakened state, she roared threateningly, her eyes locked on the humans she perceived as threats. Nova rushed to her mother, nuzzling against her wet fur and making soft sounds as if explaining the situation. "Keep back," Dr. Reynolds warned, studying the trapped bear with professional concern. "She's frightened and in pain. A dangerous combination." They maintained a safe distance while Dr. Reynolds and Elena discussed options. The trees were too thick to cut quickly, especially in these conditions. Simply pulling Luna free might cause further injury, given how tightly she was wedged. Tranquilizing her might allow them to work more safely, but the rising water made this option increasingly dangerous. As the adults deliberated, something unexpected happened. Theo, who had been quietly observing from his carrier on Nathaniel's back, suddenly began squirming and babbling excitedly, pointing toward Luna. His cries caught Nova's attention, and then, remarkably, Luna's as well. The mother bear's aggressive posture changed subtly. She tilted her head, her eyes focusing on the small human child with what appeared to be curiosity rather than threat. Her roars subsided to pained grunts, but the aggression seemed to drain from her posture. "Extraordinary," Dr. Reynolds murmured, observing the interaction with scholarly interest. "She's responding to the child just as Nova did." "It's not that unusual," Elena suggested. "Bears are intelligent creatures with strong maternal instincts. She might recognize another mother's offspring." Whatever the reason, Luna's change in demeanor created an opportunity. With the bear calmer, they might be able to get close enough to help without using tranquilizers, which would be ideal given the rising water. What happened next, however, no one could have predicted. As Nathaniel adjusted Theo's carrier, the straps loosened slightly. In a moment of extraordinary timing and toddler agility, Theo managed to wriggle partway out of the carrier before anyone could stop him. "Theo!" Olivia cried out in alarm, lunging forward as her son slipped further from the carrier. Nathaniel grabbed for him, but it was too late. Theo tumbled out, landing with a soft thud on the wet forest floor. Before any of the adults could reach him, he had pushed himself up and was crawling with surprising speed directly toward Luna and Nova. "No!" Multiple voices cried out at once, but Theo seemed deaf to their panic. He moved with purpose, his eyes fixed on the trapped mother bear with an expression of simple, pure concern that transcended all barriers of species and understanding. Time seemed to freeze as the small child approached the massive predator. Olivia felt her legs turn to stone, unable to move in her terror. Nathaniel lunged forward but was held back by Dr. Reynolds, who gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Wait," the older man whispered urgently. "Any sudden movement might trigger her defensive instincts. If she perceives a threat to her cub or to your child now—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the potential consequences. The rain continued to pour around them, the sound of water amplifying the tension of the moment. Luna's eyes tracked Theo's movement, her massive head lowering to get a better look at this tiny human approaching her. Nova scampered alongside Theo, occasionally nudging him as if guiding him. "This is unprecedented," Elena whispered, her scientific mind still taking notes even as her heart raced with concern. "The cub is actively facilitating contact." Theo reached Luna's massive front paw and did something that caused everyone to gasp. He placed his tiny hand on her wet fur and patted it gently, the same way Olivia had taught him to pet their neighbor's gentle old Labrador. His baby voice made soft cooing sounds that carried clearly in the hushed forest. More astonishing still was Luna's reaction. The enormous bear, capable of killing with a single swipe, remained perfectly still. Her previous growl subsided to a low rumble that seemed almost like purring. Her eyes, previously wild with fear and pain, softened visibly. "Ah, she recognizes innocence," Jin murmured, having joined the frozen tableau of adults. There are theories about apex predators recognizing the young of other species as non-threatening, but this level of interaction— Olivia couldn't bear it any longer. Mother's instinct overrode caution, and she began inching forward toward her baby, moving so slowly that she barely seemed to be moving at all. Nathaniel followed her lead, equal parts terrified and astonished. What happened next would later be described by Dr. Reynolds in multiple scientific papers as a moment of cross-species empathy that defies conventional understanding of wild animal behavior. Theo, his face screwed up in concentration, began pushing against one of the trees with his tiny hands. His efforts were, of course, completely ineffectual against the massive trunk, but the intent was unmistakable. He was trying to help free Luna. Nova seemed to understand. The cub positioned herself beside Theo and began digging at the base of one tree, where rainwater had softened the ground. It was as if the two youngsters, human and bear, were working in tandem to free the trapped mother. "He's showing empathy," Elena said softly, "and the cub is following his example." Dr. Reynolds nodded, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his concern for safety. "We may be witnessing something that challenges our entire understanding of interspecies communication." Luna watched the efforts of the two little ones, her eyes moving between her cub and the human child with what could only be described as wonder. When Theo lost his balance in the mud and fell against her fur, the adults tensed, expecting the worst. But Luna simply adjusted her position slightly, as if to provide him better support. The rising water, however, didn't pause for this extraordinary interaction. It had now reached Luna's chest, and her breathing was becoming labored as she struggled to keep her head above the swirling stream. "We have to act now, Doctor," Reynolds said urgently. "The water's rising too quickly." Taking advantage of Luna's unusual calm in Theo's presence, the adults began to approach slowly. Olivia reached her son first, but rather than immediately snatching him away, she knelt beside him in the mud, speaking softly. "You're trying to help the bear, aren't you, sweet boy?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pride. Theo babbled in response, still pushing ineffectually against the tree trunk. His determination was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "We'll help," Olivia promised, looking directly at Luna as if the bear could understand her words. Perhaps, on some level, she did, because the massive animal made no threatening moves as Nathaniel and the researchers drew closer. Dr. Reynolds assessed the situation quickly. The water pressure might actually help us now. If we can shift the trees even slightly, the mud and water might create enough lubrication for her to slip free. "We'll need leverage," Nathaniel said, his carpentry knowledge coming into play. He spotted a fallen branch nearby, long, thick, and relatively straight. "We can use this as a makeshift lever." While Jin radioed for additional emergency support, Nathaniel, Dr. Reynolds, and Elena positioned the branch in the narrow gap between Luna and one of the trees. The bear growled low in her throat, clearly uncomfortable with their proximity, but made no aggressive moves. Theo remained close, now sitting in Olivia's lap at what she deemed a safer distance, though still much closer than any parent would normally allow their child to a wild bear. His presence seemed to keep Luna calm, as if she understood that these humans were trying to help, not harm. "On my count," Nathaniel instructed, positioning himself at one end of the branch while Dr. Reynolds took the other. 1, 2, 3, push." They heaved against the makeshift lever with all their strength. The tree creaked but didn't budge. The water continued to rise. "Again," Nathaniel called out, his voice strained with effort. 1, 2, 3, push." This time, Elena added her strength as well. There was a subtle shifting, a creaking of wood, and then a moment of hope. The tree moved slightly. Luna seemed to sense the opportunity. With renewed energy, she pushed against the gap, her powerful muscles straining. But it wasn't enough. The gap had widened only incrementally, and in her weakened state, Luna couldn't generate enough force to free herself. The situation was growing desperate. Luna's breathing was becoming more labored as the frigid water rose higher, and exhaustion was evident in her movements. Just when it seemed their efforts might be in vain, the sound of voices and crashing underbrush announced new arrivals. 3 park rangers in rain gear emerged into the clearing, led by Jin, who had gone to intercept them. "We brought equipment," the lead ranger announced, hefting a portable hydraulic jack, standard for treefall rescues. With professional efficiency, the rangers assessed the situation and quickly deployed their equipment. The hydraulic jack was positioned precisely where it could exert maximum pressure to widen the gap between the trees. As they worked, something remarkable occurred with Nova. The bear cub, who had been staying close to Theo and Olivia, suddenly darted away into the underbrush. Before anyone could comment on her disappearance, she returned, dragging something in her mouth. A broken piece of honeycomb dripping with golden honey. With deliberate movements, Nova approached Theo and dropped the honeycomb at his feet, then backed away, as if offering a gift. The gesture was so human-like, so clearly intentional, that even the experienced rangers paused in their work to stare. "Is that a thank you?" one of them whispered. Theo giggled with delight at the offering, but Olivia gently held his hands before he could touch it. "That's for you to look at, not to touch," she said softly, understanding the significance of the moment but still mindful of hygiene and safety. The work continued with renewed urgency. The hydraulic jack began to separate the trees with mechanical precision, creaking protests from the ancient wood. Luna seemed to understand what was happening and conserved her remaining energy, waiting for her moment. "Almost there," the lead ranger called out, monitoring the pressure gauge carefully. "Just a few more centimeters." With a sudden crack that echoed through the forest, the gap widened enough for Luna to begin wriggling free. Her movements were weak from exhaustion, and for a terrifying moment it seemed she might still be stuck. That's when Theo did something that would later become the defining image of countless news stories and scientific articles. Breaking free from his mother's gentle hold, he crawled forward once more and placed both hands on Luna's side. It was, of course, a meaningless gesture in terms of actual physical help. A 13-month-old child could hardly budge a 300-pound bear, but the symbolism was powerful beyond words. "Help bear," Theo said clearly, his first fully formed phrase, emerging at this most unlikely moment. Whether it was coincidence, the inspiration of the child's touch, or simply the final bit of leverage needed, Luna gave one last mighty push with her hind legs. With a rush of water and mud, she pulled free of the trap that had held her for so long. For one heart-stopping moment, the freed bear towered over Theo, water cascading from her massive form. Everyone held their breath, ready to rush forward despite the obvious futility of trying to outrace a bear's reflexes. Luna lowered her great head until she was eye level with the tiny human who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Her hot breath ruffled Theo's fine hair as she sniffed him thoroughly, memorizing his scent. Then, with extraordinary gentleness, she touched her nose to his forehead in what could only be described as a gesture of gratitude. Nova bounded over, circling her mother's legs with evident joy, then paused to press her smaller nose against Theo's chubby hand. The moment stretched, suspended in time, a tableau of connection between species that defied conventional understanding. Then, with a final glance at the assembled humans, Luna nudged her cub and turned away. Moving with surprising grace, despite her ordeal, she led Nova back into the depths of the forest, disappearing into the green shadows as the rain began to ease. The humans stood in stunned silence, processing what they had witnessed. It was Olivia who finally broke the spell, rushing forward to scoop Theo into her arms and cover his face with tearful kisses. "My brave, crazy, wonderful boy," she whispered, clutching him close. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." Nathaniel enveloped them both in his arms, his body shaking with the delayed reaction to the danger and wonder they had experienced. I don't even have words for what that was. "Miraculous," Dr. Reynolds suggested, removing his rain-soaked hat in a gesture that seemed almost reverent. "In 30 years of studying wildlife, I have never seen anything remotely like it." The rangers were already documenting the scene, taking photographs of the trees and the disturbed ground as evidence for their report. One of them shook his head in disbelief. "No one is going to believe this without proof," he said, gesturing to the video camera Elena had somehow had the presence of mind to use during the entire incident. "We have proof," she confirmed, checking that the footage had recorded properly. "Though I'm not sure the scientific community is ready for what this suggests about interspecies communication and empathy." As they gathered their equipment and prepared to head back to the Harper cabin, the storm finally broke. Sunlight streamed through the trees, illuminating thousands of raindrops that sparkled like diamonds on every leaf and branch. Jin, who had been quietest throughout the ordeal, suddenly pointed to something on the ground near where Luna had been trapped. "Look at this," he said, kneeling to examine it more closely. It was a perfect paw print from Luna, pressed deeply into the mud, and beside it, barely visible, was the tiny handprint of a human child. "Nature's record of this moment," Dr. Reynolds said softly. "More meaningful than any documentation we could create." As they made their way back through the forest, Theo dozed peacefully in Olivia's arms, exhausted by his adventure. The adults spoke in hushed tones, already beginning to process and analyze what they had witnessed. But the true significance of the day's events would take much longer to fully understand. What none of them knew, could not have known, was that their extraordinary encounter was just the beginning. The connection formed between Theo and the bears that day had created something unexpected, a bond that transcended the normal boundaries between human and wild. And in the coming months, this connection would lead to discoveries that would challenge fundamental assumptions about animal cognition, interspecies communication, and the capacity for empathy across the divides of evolution. As they reached the edge of the forest, with the Harper cabin visible in the distance, Olivia felt Theo stir against her chest. He lifted his head, blinking sleepily, and looked back toward the trees they were leaving behind. His small face lit up with a smile of pure joy, and he pointed with one chubby finger. "Bear friends," he said clearly, his second complete phrase of the day. Olivia followed his gaze but saw nothing beyond the swaying branches and dappled shadows. Yet, somehow, she knew, they all knew, that somewhere in the depths of the forest, Luna and Nova were watching their departure. Two worlds had touched in a moment of crisis, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Back at the cabin, as they shed their soggy outer clothing and Dr. Reynolds made calls to his colleagues at the research station, Nathaniel approached Olivia with a serious expression. "I think we need to talk about what happened today," he said quietly, watching Theo play contentedly on a dry blanket, seemingly unaffected by his close encounter with wild predators. Olivia nodded, understanding the weight of his words. What they had witnessed wasn't just unusual, it was paradigm-shifting. Their child had connected with wild bears in a way that defied explanation, and that connection had likely saved Luna's life while putting Theo's at risk. It was simultaneously miraculous and terrifying. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pretend it never happened? Move away from here?" I don't even know what the right response is to whatever that was." Nathaniel ran a hand through his damp hair, his expression troubled. "I don't think we can just ignore it, but I also don't know if I want our son becoming some kind of scientific curiosity. You know they'll want to study him, study this connection." His concerns were justified. Already, Elena and Jin were reviewing the video footage with expressions of academic excitement, while Dr. Reynolds was engaged in an animated phone conversation, using terms like revolutionary and unprecedented behavioral demonstration. The implications were just beginning to unfold, like the layers of a complex puzzle that had suddenly been dumped into their ordinary lives. What had been a simple existence in harmony with nature had become something much more complicated and potentially much more significant. As the adults grappled with these weighty considerations, Theo continued his play, occasionally pausing to look out the window toward the forest with an expression of longing that seemed far too mature for his baby face. It was as if part of him remained connected to what had happened, to the bears that had shared in his extraordinary moment of compassion. What none of them realized was that this day marked not just an unusual rescue, but the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The story of Theo Harper and the bears was just beginning, and its ripples would extend far beyond one rainy day in a forest clearing. And deeper in the woods, as twilight began to fall, Luna and Nova settled into a dry cave, the mother bear licking her wounds and regaining her strength. Around them, the forest whispered its ancient secrets, carrying the scent of a human child who had, for one miraculous moment, bridged the divide between worlds that had been separate since the dawn of time. 3 weeks passed since the extraordinary rescue. The story of the Bear Boy, as some local papers had dubbed Theo, had spread far beyond their remote community. Despite Dr. Reynolds' attempts to control the narrative for scientific purposes, a hiker from a nearby trail had captured distant footage of the final moments of Luna's rescue on his phone. The blurry video, showing a toddler touching a full-grown bear that then gently nudged him before departing, had gone viral, spawning headlines ranging from awestruck to sensationalist. "Miracle child tames wild bear." "Baby bear whisperer defies death." "Mother bear spares child in act of cross-species gratitude." The Harper family had declined all interviews, choosing to protect Theo from the media circus that threatened to engulf their peaceful existence. Their driveway now sported a new gate with a no trespassing sign, a necessary defense against the curious strangers who occasionally drove out, hoping to glimpse the Bear Boy and his family. Inside their cabin, life attempted to return to normal, though normal had acquired new dimensions. Dr. Reynolds and his team had installed wildlife cameras in the forest surrounding their property, with the Harpers' permission, hoping to document Luna and Nova's movements and behaviors following the encounter. Olivia and Nathaniel had agreed to the research under strict conditions. Their family's privacy would be respected, and Theo would not be treated as a research subject. On this particular morning, 3 weeks after the rescue, Olivia sat at the kitchen table with Elena, reviewing footage from the forest cameras. The two women had formed an unexpected friendship, bonded by their shared experience and their balanced perspectives on the intersection of science and wonder. "Nothing new yesterday," Elena reported, scrolling through images on her tablet. Luna and Nova passed by the eastern ridge around dawn, but they stayed within their usual territory. No unusual behaviors noted. Olivia nodded, sipping her coffee. She'd become surprisingly invested in the bear's well-being, checking the footage almost daily. "How are Luna's injuries healing?" "Remarkably well," Elena replied. "Bears have incredible healing capabilities, and she's young and strong. The abrasions on her flanks from the tree bark are almost completely healed. From the living room came the sound of Theo's delighted laughter, where he was playing with his father. The toddler had changed in subtle ways since the encounter. His vocabulary, previously limited to single-syllable approximations, had expanded rapidly. Bear, tree, help, and friend featured prominently in his new lexicon. More striking was his fascination with the forest. He would often stand at the window pointing toward the trees, his expression one of longing that seemed far too complex for a child his age. Elena noticed Olivia's distracted gaze toward her son. Any more unusual behaviors? Olivia hesitated, then decided to share her observations. "He draws them," she said quietly, retrieving a folder from a nearby drawer. She spread several sheets of paper across the table, crude toddler scribbles, yet with undeniable patterns. Dark, circular shapes that could only be bears, one large and one small, repeatedly appeared in Theo's artwork. "That's remarkable," Elena said, examining the drawings. "His fine motor skills shouldn't be developed enough for this level of consistent representation." "That's not all," Olivia continued, lowering her voice. "Yesterday, I found him sitting by the back door before dawn, just waiting, as if he knew something was coming. 10 minutes later, one of your cameras captured Luna and Nova passing by the edge of our property, the closest they've come since the incident." Elena's scientific mind raced with the implications. "You think he sensed them somehow? Knew they were nearby?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Olivia admitted. "All I know is my son is connected to those bears in a way that science probably can't fully explain." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Dr. Reynolds, arriving for his weekly check-in. The older scientist had become a fixture in their lives, his initial academic interest in the bear encounter gradually transforming into genuine concern for both the Harper family and the bears he had studied for so long. "Good morning," he greeted them, removing his hat as Nathaniel showed him in. His weathered face broke into a warm smile when he spotted Theo, who immediately toddled over with arms outstretched. Despite his parents' initial concerns about too many researchers around their son, Theo had formed an immediate bond with the grandfatherly scientist. "And how's my little naturalist today?" Dr. Reynolds asked, lifting Theo into his arms with practiced ease. The toddler babbled happily, pointing toward the window that faced the forest. "Bear coming," Theo announced clearly, causing all 4 adults to freeze. "What did he say?" Nathaniel asked, though they had all heard it perfectly. Dr. Reynolds set Theo down gently, his expression thoughtful rather than alarmed. "When did he start saying this?" "Just now," Olivia replied, moving to the window to scan the forest edge. "This is the first time he said those exact words." Elena was already checking the camera feeds on her tablet. "Nothing on the perimeter sensors," she reported. "No bear activity detected this morning." Dr. Reynolds knelt beside Theo, his scientific curiosity fully engaged. "Theo," he asked gently, "how do you know bear is coming?" The toddler's response was typical of his age, fragmented and difficult to interpret. "Bear hurt," he said, pointing to his own leg. "Bear coming." A chill ran through the room. "Is he saying a bear is injured?" Nathaniel asked, moving protectively closer to his son. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Dr. Reynolds cautioned, though his expression had grown concerned. "Children this age blend reality and imagination freely. He might simply be processing his memories of Luna's injury." Yet, even as he spoke, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. He checked it, his eyebrows rising. "That's odd. One of our tracking collars just registered unusual movement. A young male bear we've been monitoring has suddenly changed direction and is moving toward this general area. That's miles away, though, right? Olivia asked, trying to keep her voice calm for Theo's sake. Yes, at least 5 miles by our last triangulation, Dr. Reynolds confirmed. And it's probably nothing unusual. Bears change direction all the time based on food sources, territorial disputes, any number of factors. But Theo remained by the window, his small hand pressed against the glass, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line with an intensity that belied his tender age. The day progressed without incident, and gradually the adults relaxed. Dr. Reynolds reviewed the camera footage with Elena, noting Luna and Nova's continuing good health and normal behaviors. They discussed publishing their preliminary observations in a wildlife biology journal, carefully anonymizing the human participants while documenting the unprecedented bear behaviors. As evening approached, Dr. Reynolds and Elena prepared to leave. The scientist paused at the door, watching Theo play on the living room floor with wooden blocks. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about what Theo said this morning. About the bear being hurt." Nathaniel nodded, having clearly been pondering the same thing. "You don't really think he could know something about a bear miles away, do you?" Dr. Reynolds smiled gently. 20 years ago, I would have dismissed the idea completely. But science is continuously discovering new dimensions of animal cognition and communication that we never imagined possible. Elephants can recognize the specific alarm calls of human tribes based on the level of threat they pose. Crows can remember human faces for years and teach other crows which humans are dangerous. The boundaries of what we know about animal awareness are expanding daily. But this would be something different, Olivia said quietly. This would suggest some form of connection across distance. Indeed, Dr. Reynolds acknowledged. And while my scientific mind hesitates to leap to such conclusions, I find myself increasingly open to possibilities I once would have dismissed. He glanced at Theo again. Whatever is happening, your son is a remarkable child. The way he responded to those bears, it was as if he understood their distress on a level that transcended the typical barriers between species. As the researchers departed, the Harper family settled into their evening routine. Dinner, bath time for Theo, and the quiet rituals of bedtime followed their familiar pattern. Yet an undercurrent of watchfulness remained, particularly when Theo kept returning to the window, pointing to the forest with increasing insistence. "Bear coming," he repeated, just before Olivia tucked him into his crib. "Bear hurt." "It's okay, sweetie," she soothed, stroking his fine hair. "Time to sleep now. You can look for bears tomorrow." Eventually, Theo succumbed to exhaustion, his breathing deepening as sleep claimed him. Olivia joined Nathaniel in the living room, where he was checking the security cameras they had installed after the media attention began. "All clear," he reported, setting aside the tablet. "No curious trespassers tonight." Olivia sank onto the couch beside him, leaning against his solid presence. "Nate, what if there really is something to what Theo's been saying about a hurt bear?" Nathaniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I've been asking myself the same thing. Part of me wants to dismiss it as coincidence or imagination. But after what we saw that day," he shook his head, "I don't think I'll ever again be certain about the limits of what's possible." They fell silent, listening to the night sounds of the forest through the partially open window. The distant hooting of an owl, the rustle of wind through leaves, the occasional scurrying of small nocturnal creatures. It was the abrupt cessation of these sounds that first alerted them to something unusual. The forest had gone eerily quiet, as it often did when a predator was moving through. Then came a sound that sent chills down their spines. A low, pained moan, distinctly ursine, from somewhere near the edge of their property. Nathaniel was on his feet immediately, moving to the window with Olivia close behind. In the dim moonlight, they could make out a dark shape emerging from the tree line, a bear, moving with an uneven, limping gait. "That's not Luna," Olivia whispered, having become surprisingly adept at identifying the mother bear from a distance. "It's smaller, but not a cub." The subadult male Dr. Reynolds mentioned, Nathaniel realized, reaching for the phone, the one that was miles away this morning. Before he could complete the call, another sound brought them both back to the window. A soft cry from the Theo's room, followed by the unmistakable thud of something hitting the floor. They rushed to the nursery, hearts pounding, to find the crib empty. Somehow, Theo had managed to climb out, something he had never done before, and was now standing at his bedroom window, which faced the forest. His small hands pressed against the glass as he watched the injured bear with intense focus. "Help bear," he said clearly as his parents entered, not even turning to look at them. "Help bear now." Olivia scooped him up immediately. "No, sweetie, we need to stay inside where it's safe. Daddy's calling Dr. Reynolds to help the bear." But Theo began to struggle with surprising strength, tears filling his eyes. "Help bear now," he insisted, his voice rising with urgency. Nathaniel completed his call to Dr. Reynolds, explaining the situation tersely. "He says to keep all doors and windows locked and stay inside," he reported after hanging up. "He's 30 minutes away, but coming immediately with tranquilizer equipment." 30 minutes might be too late," Olivia said softly, looking out at the injured bear, which had now collapsed at the edge of their yard. Even from a distance, they could see a dark stain on its right hind leg, blood glistening in the moonlight. "Bullet wound, most likely," Nathaniel said grimly. "Poachers have been active on the North Ridge, according to the ranger reports." Theo continued to squirm in Olivia's arms, his distress escalating. "Help bear," he repeated, tears streaming down his face now. "Please help bear." The parents exchanged a long look, years of shared understanding passing between them in seconds. They both recognized the extraordinary nature of what was happening. Their son's inexplicable connection to these wild creatures, the injured bear's appearance exactly as Theo had predicted, and now the young animal slowly bleeding on their property. "We can't just let it suffer for half an hour," Olivia said finally. Nathaniel nodded, his jaw tight with resolution. "I have the emergency tranquilizer kit Dr. Reynolds left us and basic first aid supplies. If it's a clean wound, I might be able to at least slow the bleeding until he arrives." "It's dangerous," Olivia said, though her tone suggested she had already accepted the necessity of action. "So was watching our 13-month-old approach a trapped mother bear," Nathaniel replied with a grim smile. "And yet, here we are." They moved with careful efficiency, born of their years in wilderness settings. Olivia secured Theo in his room with his favorite toys, though the toddler remained fixated on the window, watching the bear with evident concern. Nathaniel gathered the necessary supplies: tranquilizer gun, first aid kit, thick protective gloves, and a powerful flashlight. "I'll go out the front and circle around," he planned. "Stay with Theo and keep the phone ready to call emergency services if anything goes wrong." Olivia grabbed his arm before he could leave. "Be careful," she whispered. "Remember what Dr. Reynolds taught us. Approach from the front where he can see you, move slowly, speak softly." Nathaniel nodded, kissed her quickly, and headed out into the night. Olivia returned to Theo's room, finding him still at the window. To her amazement, He seemed calmer now, as if sensing that help was on the way. "Daddy help Bear," he said with absolute confidence, pointing to where Nathaniel's flashlight beam could now be seen moving cautiously across the yard. Outside, Nathaniel approached the injured bear with every sense on high alert. This was not Luna, with whom they had established a strange sort of trust. This was a young male, probably 2 or 3 years old, driven by pain and fear, unpredictable and dangerous, despite his injury. "Hey there," Nathaniel called softly, keeping his voice steady and calm as he'd learned from watching Dr. Reynolds. "Just taking a look at that leg, buddy. Not gonna hurt you." The bear raised its head weakly, dark eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. It made no move to rise, either too weak or somehow sensing Nathaniel's non-threatening intent. As he drew closer, Nathaniel could see the wound clearly. A bullet hole in the hindquarter, still seeping blood. With movements practiced during Dr. Reynolds' emergency training sessions, Nathaniel prepared the tranquilizer dart. "Just a little pinch," he murmured, though he knew the bear couldn't understand his words. "Then we can take a proper look at that leg." The tranquilizer found its mark, and Nathaniel retreated to a safe distance to wait for it to take effect. Inside the house, Theo watched the proceedings with uncanny focus, occasionally nodding as if approving of his father's actions. "Bear sleep," he announced as the tranquilizer began to work. "Fix leg now." Olivia marveled at her son's understanding, so far beyond what should be possible for a child his age. There was something happening here that defied conventional explanation, a connection that seemed to transcend normal boundaries of communication and awareness. Outside, once confident the bear was fully sedated, Nathaniel approached again. The wound, while serious, appeared to be a through-and-through. The bullet had passed clean through the muscle of the upper thigh without hitting bone or major arteries. Using the wilderness first aid training he'd received years ago as a park ranger, he cleaned and bandaged the wound as best he could, knowing it was only a temporary measure until proper veterinary care could be administered. As he worked, a sound from the forest edge made him freeze. He turned slowly, heart pounding, to find himself being watched by 2 familiar figures, Luna and Nova, standing just beyond the tree line, their eyes reflecting his flashlight beam. Inside the house, Theo suddenly laughed with delight. "Bear friends, come," he announced, clapping his hands together. "Help bear friends." Olivia looked out in astonishment to see the mother bear and her cub observing Nathaniel's work from a distance. There was no aggression in their posture, just watchful attention. It was as if they were overseeing his treatment of their injured kin. "It's impossible," she whispered, though she was becoming increasingly unsure about what was and wasn't possible when it came to these bears and her son. Nathaniel completed his emergency treatment and backed away from the sedated bear, never taking his eyes off Luna and Nova. To his amazement, once he was at what they seemingly deemed a safe distance, the pair emerged from the forest. Luna approached the injured male cautiously, sniffing his bandaged wound. Nova remained slightly behind, her behavior deferential to her mother's investigation. After a thorough examination, Luna did something extraordinary. She looked directly at Nathaniel and made a soft huffing sound that contained no threat, almost like an acknowledgement. Then she settled her massive body next to the injured male, as if standing guard while he was vulnerable. By the time Dr. Reynolds arrived with his team, the scene was set. An injured bear, professionally bandaged, being guarded by a mother bear and her cub, while a human family watched from the safety of their home. The wildlife biologist stood speechless for a long moment, taking in the tableau that defied everything he thought he knew about bear behavior. "In 40 years of studying these animals," he finally said, I have never seen anything like this. This level of apparent cooperation, this seeming understanding of human intervention as helpful rather than threatening, it's revolutionary. The team worked efficiently, transferring the sedated bear to their vehicle for transport to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Throughout the process, Luna and Nova remained at the forest edge, watching intently but making no aggressive moves. Only when the injured bear was safely loaded did they retreat into the darkness of the trees. Inside the house, Theo finally allowed himself to be put back to bed, seemingly satisfied with the outcome. "Bear better now," he murmured sleepily as Olivia tucked him in. "Bear friends happy." As she stroked his hair until he fell asleep, Olivia was struck by the weight of what they were experiencing, something that existed in the borderlands between science and mystery, between documented fact and inexplicable connection. Her son had somehow known about an injured bear miles away. That bear had somehow found its way directly to their home, and Luna and Nova had somehow understood that humans were helping, not harming, their injured kin. Later that night, after Dr. Reynolds had departed with the injured bear and the house was quiet once more, Olivia and Nathaniel sat on their porch, looking out at the forest that suddenly seemed filled with new possibilities. "What do you think is happening?" Olivia asked softly. "Between Theo and these bears?" Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "I think," he finally said, "that we're witnessing something that might never be fully explained by conventional science. Some kind of connection that exists beyond our current understanding. Do you think it's unique to Theo? Or could other children have this capacity too?" "Maybe it's something we all have as children," Nathaniel suggested. "Some primal ability to connect with the natural world that gets lost as we grow older and learn boundaries between species, between ourselves and the world around us." Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, finding comfort in his presence as they faced these unfamiliar waters together. "What does this mean for Theo's future, for who he'll become?" "I don't know," Nathaniel admitted honestly. "But I think our job hasn't changed. We protect him, guide him, and try to understand without limiting who he is and what he's capable of becoming." As if in response to their conversation, a lone wolf howl sounded from the distant mountains, soon joined by others, the pack answering their members' call. The familiar night music of the forest was reasserting itself, life continuing its ancient rhythms despite the extraordinary events of the evening. Yet something had shifted, not just for the Harper family, but perhaps for our understanding of the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. In the simple actions of a child too young to have learned the supposed limitations of such connections, doors had opened that might never fully close again. And deep in the forest, Luna and Nova settled into their den, their awareness extending in ways that humans were only beginning to comprehend. A mother's protective instinct that recognized kindness across species boundaries, a cub's openness to connection that mirrored a human child's, and perhaps something more profound that science had yet to name or understand. The story of Theo Harper and the bears would continue to unfold in the days and years ahead, challenging assumptions and opening new frontiers of understanding. But for tonight, the forest was quiet. The bears were safe, and a child slept peacefully, his dreams filled with connections that transcended the barriers adults had forgotten how to cross. The injured bear, whom Dr. Reynolds named Orion after the constellation visible on the night of his rescue, made a remarkable recovery at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The bullet was confirmed to be from a poacher's rifle, and the incident sparked renewed efforts to patrol and protect the forest preserves surrounding the Harper property. 2 months after the rescue, on a crisp autumn morning, Olivia was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Theo, now 15 months old and increasingly verbal, suddenly abandoned his toys and ran to the window. "Bear friends back," he announced with excited certainty. "Bear friends bringing Ori." Olivia had grown accustomed to her son's unusual pronouncements about the bears, but this one made her pause. Ori was the nickname the family had given to Orion during updates from Dr. Reynolds about his recovery. They had been told just yesterday that the young male would be released back into the wild soon, but the location was being kept confidential to protect him from further poaching attempts. "Honey, Ori is still at the animal hospital," she explained gently, kneeling beside Theo. "He's getting better, but he's not ready to come home yet." Theo shook his head with the stubborn certainty of a toddler. "Coming now," he insisted, pointing toward the forest. "Look." Humoring him, Olivia glanced out the window and nearly dropped the spoon she was holding. There, at the edge of their yard, stood Dr. Reynolds with his research assistant Elena. And emerging from a large transport crate in the back of their truck was a familiar bear. Orion, his injured leg now healed though he still moved with a slight limp. Olivia called for Nathaniel, who joined them at the window in time to see something remarkable unfold. As Orion took his first tentative steps back into the forest, 2 more bears appeared from the tree line. Luna and Nova, now noticeably larger than she had been during the spring rescue. "This is unprecedented," Nathaniel whispered, watching as the 3 bears engaged in what could only be described as a reunion. They shouldn't even be associating with each other like this. A mother bear with a cub would normally drive away a young male. But Luna made no aggressive moves toward Orion. Instead, the 3 bears sniffed each other thoroughly, their body language relaxed and familiar. Then, as the astonished researchers documented the interaction, Luna led the way back into the forest, with Nova and Orion following like family members returning home together. Dr. Reynolds spotted the Harpers at the window and waved them out. As Olivia and Nathaniel joined him on the lawn, Theo squirming excitedly in his father's arms, the scientist's expression was one of pure academic wonderment. "We didn't tell anyone we were releasing him here today," he said without preamble. "The location was classified. Only Elena and I knew. Yet somehow—" He gestured toward Theo, who was pointing after the departed bears with evident delight. "Bear family now," Theo announced happily. "All better." Elena, who had been reviewing footage on her camera, looked up with widened eyes. "You need to see this," she said, turning the display toward them. The video showed the moment of Orion's release. As the young male bear took his first steps of freedom, the camera had captured Luna and Nova emerging from the trees. But there was something else. A brief moment where all 3 bears turned simultaneously to look directly at the Harper house, specifically at the window where Theo had been watching. "It's as if they knew he was there," Elena said softly. "As if they were acknowledging him." Dr. Reynolds stroked his beard thoughtfully. "We've been documenting some highly unusual social behaviors among these 3 bears since Orion's injury. They've been maintaining overlapping territories, occasionally sharing food sources, behaviors that contradict established understanding of bear social structures outside of mating season." "And you think this is because of what happened with Theo?" Olivia asked, watching her son as he continued to babble happily about his bear friends. "I think," Dr. Reynolds said carefully, "that we're only beginning to understand the ripples created by that extraordinary day. Your son established some kind of connection. Call it communication, empathy, whatever term you prefer, that seems to have altered behavioral patterns not just between humans and bears, but among the bears themselves." Nathaniel shook his head in amazement. "So, what happens now? Now, Dr. Reynolds said, a spark of excitement lighting his weathered features. "We document everything. These bears are rewriting our understanding of their species' cognitive and social capabilities. And your son—" He paused, looking at Theo with undisguised wonder. "Well, I suspect he's just beginning to show us what's possible when we truly open ourselves to connection with the natural world." As if to punctuate his words, a distant bear call echoed from the forest. Not a roar of aggression or distress, but the softer sound bears made when communicating with their own kind. To the astonishment of the adults, Theo tilted his head back and made a surprisingly accurate approximation of the sound in response. In the silence that followed, they could almost believe the forest itself was listening, holding its breath as ancient boundaries between species began to dissolve in ways that might change our understanding of our place in the natural world forever. The story that had begun with a mother bear trapped between two trees was expanding into something far greater. A narrative not just about one extraordinary rescue, but about the possibilities that exist when compassion bridges the divide between worlds that have been separate for too long. And at the center of it all was a child, too young to know such connections were supposed to be impossible. A child who simply saw a creature in need and reached out to help, opening doors that might never close again.